My name is Ryan Carter. I'm 34 years old and have been a detective for the past decade in Willow Creek, a sleepy little town in Michigan where little more than petty thefts and bar fights rarely happen. I've always been a skeptic. I believe in facts, evidence, and that every crime can be solved with logic and determination. At least that's what I believed until the Mirror Lake murders began. Now, here I am, standing on the edge of this silent lake, with a thick fog creeping over the surface like a veil of morning. It's 3 a.m. The sky is overcast, with not a single star visible, and the cold wind carries the damp smell of stagnant water. In front of me, the body of a young woman lies on the shore. Amanda Lewis, 23, missing for 2 days. Her eyes are open, frozen in an expression of pure terror, as if she had seen something unspeakable before she died. I take a deep breath, trying to dispel the feeling of unease growing in my chest. The scene makes no sense. There are no signs of a struggle, no footprints other than ours. The only thing out of the ordinary is a trail of water leading from the body to the edge of the lake, as if she had climbed out of it. What the hell happened here? I mutter to myself. My flashlight cuts through the darkness, illuminating the distorted reflection of the trees in the water. The surface is too calm, like a liquid mirror. A few forensics officers stand behind me, whispering nervously to each other. They don't like this place. And for the first time, I understand why. Detective Carter? Officer Harris's voice snaps me back to reality. We found this in her pocket. He hands me a wet piece of paper. I open it carefully, the writing smudged but still legible. He's in the water. A chill runs down my spine. I look back at the lake, feeling an invisible pressure tighten in my chest. He's in the water. Who is he? And why did Amanda write this before she died? This is starting to get out of hand, Harris says, his voice shaking. People are scared, Detective. They want answers. And they're going to get them, I say, trying to hide my own uncertainty. But what answers could I give? This was the 4th victim in less than 3 months, all of them found exactly the same way. Bodies on the shore of the lake, clothes soaked through, expressions frozen in terror. There were no footprints, no witnesses, just the lake, still and unresponsive. I walk closer to the water, my shoes sinking into the wet mud. A part of me hopes to see some clue, something logical that would explain all of this. But all I see is the flickering reflection of the trees and my own figure, distorted by the fog. Then something moves. A shadowy shadow glides beneath the surface of the water, too fast to be a fish. My heart races. I stand still, holding my breath, my eyes fixed on the lake. The water calms again, as if nothing had happened. Was it my imagination? Was it fatigue playing tricks on me? I take a step back, feeling the cold seep into my bones. An irrational fear begins to grow inside me like a poisoned seed. I try to push it away. I don't believe in monsters, ghosts, or curses. There are only criminals and the detectives who catch them. But Mirror Lake seems to laugh at my logic. Let's collect the body, I tell Harris, and keep the perimeters sealed. No one comes in here until we have more information. Harris nods, relieved to be able to get away from the lake. I watch as he joins the other officers, and for a moment, I'm alone. The wind blows softly, making the leaves on the trees whisper ancient secrets. The silence is so deep I can almost hear my own blood rushing through my veins. Suddenly, a low, distant voice cuts through the air, carried on the wind. A whispering voice, almost imperceptible, but real enough to make my heart stop for a second. You shouldn't be here. My eyes widen and I turn my head to all sides. There's no one there. Just the fog, the darkness, and the lake, still and serene. I take a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Maybe it's just the wind, or maybe I'm starting to lose my mind. That's it for today, I mutter, pushing away from the shore. As I walk back to the car, I feel an invisible presence watching me. The feeling is so intense that I don't dare look back. Something is in Mirror Lake, something that doesn't want to be discovered. And now I know that this investigation will be like no other I've faced before. Little did I know that this was only the beginning. That voice still echoed in my mind. You shouldn't be here. I could try to ignore it, but I couldn't forget. I spent the night awake, sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the reports of the 4 victims. The images of the bodies with their terrified expressions haunted me, and Amanda Lewis's wet paper sat there beside me, like a silent reminder of what I couldn't explain. The lake was challenging me, and for the first time I felt like I might be dealing with something beyond my comprehension. But I couldn't stop. It was my job, or maybe my obsession, to figure this out. I had to go back to the lake and find some clue that could fit these pieces together. The next morning, I put on my heavy coat and headed back to Mirror Lake. The fog from the night before had lifted, but the cold lingered. The trees were too still, their bare branches like skeletal fingers pointing up at the cloudy sky. The water remained still, reflecting the world in a way that felt wrong, as if something was lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for me. I took a deep breath and began walking along the shore. Each step sank into the cold mud, leaving tracks that were quickly erased by the dampness. The silence was so profound that my own thoughts seemed too loud. Then I heard it. Plop. A soft, almost imperceptible sound, like something breaking the surface of the water. I turned my head quickly, my hand instinctively going to the gun in my holster. There was nothing, just the mirror-like surface of the lake, unchanged. I'm getting paranoid, I thought. I kept walking, my eyes scanning every inch of the shore. It was then that I saw something among the reeds, a dark shape, half submerged. I approached cautiously, my muscles tensing. The muddy water slowly revealed what was hidden, a silver earring stuck in a water plant. A sharp chill ran down my spine. It was the same kind of earring Amanda Lewis wore. How did this get here? I'm sorry, I muttered, bending down to pick up the object. The water around the earring had darkened, as if black ink had been spilled there. When my hand touched the surface, a wave of ice-cold water rushed up my arm. The pain was so intense that I let out a cry and recoiled, falling backward into the mud. My wrist burned, as if it had been plunged into pure ice. Before I could stand up, I saw the water churn. Bubbles began to rise, popping softly on the surface. Then the figure emerged. A human silhouette, translucent and dark, began to slowly rise from the water. Its face was a blur, but its eyes, 2 cold, pale lights, were fixed on me. My breath caught in my throat and my entire body went numb with terror. The figure took a step toward me. Every movement it made was accompanied by a splashing sound, as if it were completely soaked. It raised a skeletal hand and pointed at me. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was a cold whisper, like wind rustling through graves. My mind screamed at me to move, but my legs wouldn't obey. Then the figure began to fade, dissolving into a cloud of black mist that merged back into the water. Silence returned, but the cold lingered. I managed to stand up, my knees shaking and my head throbbing. The icy mark still burned into my wrist, a physical reminder that it hadn't been a delusion. I took a deep breath, trying to process what I had just seen. "What are you?" I whispered to the lake, as if it could answer me. The lake, of course, fell silent, but I knew the truth now. Something ancient and angry inhabited these waters, something that could not be captured or trapped. And as long as that presence was there, no one would be safe. I walked back to the car, feeling defeated. My skeptical mind struggled with what my eyes had seen, but there was no longer any room for doubt. Willow Creek held a dark secret, and Mirror Lake was its silent and deadly guardian. When I arrived in town, the first rays of sunlight were beginning to tint the buildings with shades of gold. The world seemed to go on as usual, oblivious to the darkness I had encountered. But I knew that peace was only an illusion. The lake was waiting, and it wouldn't be long before another victim was lured into its depths. I looked at my reflection in the car mirror. My eyes were sunken, tired, with the shadow of a fear that would not go away. Some things cannot be stopped. They just wait. And as much as I tried to fight it, I knew that the lake was not finished with me. My name is Derek Miller. I'm 35 years old, an investigative journalist, and to be honest, I don't believe in ghost stories, aliens, or anything that defies logic. I've spent years debunking hoaxes and solving mysteries that turned out to be just stories badly told. When I heard about the disappearances on Nevada's Route 375, the infamous alien highway, I knew that was my next mission. To prove that it was all just paranoia and coincidence. Now here I am, driving alone on a highway in the middle of the desert. It's 11:50 p.m. The sky is a moonless black dome, dotted with stars that seem colder than bright. My headlights illuminate the cracked asphalt and the sand that the wind insists on blowing onto the road. All around me, the vastness of the desert stretches out in every direction, dotted only with jagged rock formations. The silence is almost absolute, interrupted only by the hum of the tires against the asphalt. I've been on the road for 2 hours now, and I haven't seen a single living soul. Not a house, not a light, nothing. Just emptiness. Come on, Derek, I mutter to myself. It's just another deserted road, nothing special. I look at the dashboard. The clock reads 001. A strange feeling begins to settle in the back of my mind, an uneasiness that I can't explain. I take a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Suddenly, the radio hisses. An abrupt interference that makes me jump in my seat. The sound is a low hiss, interrupted by static and whispers. I turn the radio knob to turn it off, but the hissing persists. The volume increases on its own, and for a moment I swear I hear my name among the noises. Derek, are you listening? My skin crawls. I glance in the rearview mirror, but the road behind me is empty, lit only by the car's taillights. I try to calm myself. It must just be a glitch in the radio. Cheap technology never lasts long in this desert heat. The interference disappears as quickly as it started. The silence returns, but now it feels thicker, as if something invisible is surrounding me. I keep driving, forcing myself to focus on the road. Then I see it, lights appearing on the horizon. Small at first, then larger and brighter. They flicker and move erratically, too fast to be another car's headlights. My fingers sweat on the steering wheel. The lights seem to be following me, keeping up with my car's speed. I accelerate a little, trying to outrun them, but the lights adjust, floating and dancing in the night sky. For a moment, they disappear. It was just your imagination, Derek, I whisper, my voice shaking. But before I can finish the sentence, the lights reappear, this time right next to the car. They're so close I can see their glow reflected in the windows. A low hum fills the air, making the steering wheel vibrate in my hands. No, 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 I whisper. I accelerate even more, the engine roaring in protest. Eyes glued to the road, I ignore everything around me, focused only on moving forward. But the road seems to stretch on forever, as if I'm stuck in an endless loop. The lights keep following me, zigzagging alongside me like predators toying with their prey. My heart beats so fast it feels like it's going to come out of my mouth. I try to convince myself that there's a rational explanation for all of this. Weather balloons, drones, some elaborate prank. Then the radio crackles again. A metallic, distorted voice emerges from the static. Stop now, before it's too late. My mind freezes. The hum grows louder, filling every corner of the car. The lights are now in front of me, blocking the road. There's nowhere to go. My instincts scream at me to brake, but my fear makes me accelerate even more. The lights shine brightly, blinding me for a second. I feel an all-encompassing glare, as if the world itself is shattering around me. And then, silence. When I open my eyes, I'm stopped on the shoulder of the road. The engine is off and the clock on the dashboard reads 0001, exactly the same time as before. I look around, but the road is empty. The lights are gone. The radio is muted. My hands are shaking. My entire body is covered in cold sweat. I try to process what just happened, but my mind refuses to cooperate. I was there. The lights were there. But now, all that's left is darkness. What the hell is going on here? I whisper. The road ahead of me seems to stretch on forever, a strip of asphalt leading into the unknown. I take a deep breath and start the car, determined to keep going. I need answers, even if the truth is waiting to swallow me. The car engine roared to life with a low roar, but nothing seemed normal. The clock still read 0001. It was as if time had stopped. I looked out the window and the road ahead seemed to stretch on forever, shrouded in oppressive darkness. I took a deep breath and accelerated. With every mile I drove, the fear grew, a tight knot in my stomach. The silence was almost deafening. Only the sound of the tires on the cracked asphalt reminded me that I was still there. But something was wrong. Every shadow seemed to move. Every breath of wind whispered my name. Then the radio crackled again. The static intensified, twisting into distorted sounds. A metallic voice emerged from the noise. "Stop now, before it's too late." My heart raced. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to ignore the shiver running down my spine. The voice seemed to be inside my head, pulsing with every beat of my heart. In the rearview mirror, I saw lights glowing on the horizon, small at first, but quickly growing. They moved too fast with unnatural precision, first behind me, then beside me, as if they were escorting me. I accelerated even more, the engine roaring in protest. "Come on, this can't be real," I muttered to myself. The lights surrounded me, pulsing with an almost painful intensity. I tried to look away, but they were everywhere. A low hum filled the air, making the steering wheel vibrate beneath my hands. My ears ached, my head throbbed. Then suddenly the lights went out. Darkness returned, thick and suffocating. It took my eyes a few seconds to adjust. It was as if the road had disappeared, replaced by a black void. I looked around, trying to make sense of where I was. The rock formations were different, distorted, like the twisted silhouettes of creatures lurking in the darkness. The cold was biting, and the silence was absolute. That was when I saw it. A figure was standing on the side of the road, tall, slender, shrouded in shadows. Its eyes were 2 points of cold, lifeless light. My lungs tightened, and fear paralyzed me. The figure raised an arm and pointed at me. "You shouldn't be here," whispered the metallic voice. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't obey. The figure took a step forward, and the ground seemed to shake beneath its feet. A feeling of absolute emptiness enveloped me, as if the world were disintegrating around me. With a superhuman effort, I pressed down on the accelerator pedal. The tires skidded on the loose sand and the car moved forward. The figure disappeared into the darkness, but the cold remained, clinging to my bones. The road materialized again in front of me. The lights had disappeared. The humming had stopped. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing but darkness. I drove on and on until I saw the first rays of sunlight tinting the sky orange and pink. When I finally stopped the car, I was back where I had started my journey. The clock read 6:30. The lost time was a blank in my memory, like a chapter torn from a book. I got out of the car, my legs shaking. The desert around me seemed calm and normal, but I knew better. Something ancient and intelligent lurked on that road, waiting for fools like me to play cat and mouse. I took one last look at Route 375. It looked like an ordinary road, but I knew the truth. Some mysteries are not meant to be investigated. Some roads are not meant to be traveled. I started the car and drove away without looking back. My name is Chris Matthews. I'm a 22-year-old journalism student at the University of Chicago, and I've always been fascinated by unsolved crime stories. It's not just the gruesome details or the fear they evoke. It's the idea that the truth is out there, buried beneath layers of time and silence, waiting to be unearthed. In recent weeks, Chicago has been in a panic over a series of brutal murders. 4 victims, all found in abandoned butcher shops, horribly mutilated. The similarity to the crimes committed in the 1920s by John the Cleaver Reynolds is impossible to ignore. After his execution in 1926, the murders stopped. So how do you explain that nearly a century later the same horrors are happening again? Tonight I decided to go to one of those abandoned butcher shops. I needed to see it for myself, to feel the weight of this dark history. The place I chose was the old Reed's Butcher Shop, closed since the 1950s. It was located in a dimly lit alley, surrounded by decaying buildings and an unsettling silence. I pushed the rusty door open with a long creak, as if the building itself were protesting my presence. The smell of rust and rotting meat filled my nostrils, making my stomach churn. The flashlight in my hand shook slightly as I shone it into the dark interior. The floor was covered in dust and debris. Countertops stained with dried blood and rusty blades still hung on the walls, as if the place had been abandoned in a hurry. Each step I took produced a muffled creak. The silence seemed to absorb the sound, making each movement heavier. "Just a dusty old butcher shop, Chris," I muttered to myself, trying to ease the weight of my growing fear. As I explored, the beam of the flashlight illuminated strange markings on the walls, deep scratches, as if someone had scraped a razor blade against the tile. I crouched down to take a picture and realized the marks formed words. "He's never gone." My heart raced. I straightened up quickly, my eyes scanning the room. Nothing moved, but a sense of being watched intensified. The air grew colder, sharp as an invisible blade. Suddenly, I heard a soft sound coming from the back of the store, something being dragged across the floor. I froze in place, my blood running cold in my veins. The flashlight trembled in my hand as I tried to focus on the source of the sound. "Is anyone there?" My voice came out shaky, barely audible. The silence answered, thick and oppressive. I took a hesitant step toward the sound. My feet sank slightly into something damp. I looked down and saw a trail of fresh blood stretching all the way to the back door. A wave of nausea hit me, but my curiosity got the better of me. I followed the trail, each step taking me deeper into the nightmare. The back door was ajar, pitch black beyond it. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The flashlight illuminated a small room. Rusty hooks hung from the ceiling, and a figure covered in a bloody sheet hung from one of them. My mind took a moment to process what I was seeing. Then the sheet moved. I let out a muffled scream and took a step back, the flashlight nearly falling from my hand. The sheet fell to the floor, revealing only a grotesquely mutilated mannequin. But there was something even worse. A cracked mirror in the background reflected the room, and a tall, hooded shadow behind me. I turned around, but there was nothing there. "Enough of this," I muttered, my heart beating so fast it felt like it would explode. I ran out of the butcher shop, the sounds of my footsteps echoing like hammer blows in my brain. When I reached the street, the cold night air hit me like a punch. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I looked back. The door to the butcher shop was closed, as if it had never been opened, but I knew what I had seen. I knew I was not alone inside. John, the Cleaver Reynolds, may have been dead for almost a century, but something told me he was never really gone. And now he wanted everyone to know it. I just didn't know if I was willing to find out what he wanted. The cold night wind bit my face as I walked away from the butcher shop. My lungs burned, and my heart was still pounding wildly. The street was deserted, lit only by dim streetlights that cast distorted shadows. My hands were shaking, and I could still smell the rust and rotting flesh clinging to me. I tried to rationalize what had happened. A trick of the mind? A suggestion? Maybe I was too tired, and my imagination, fueled by all the stories of John the Cleaver Reynolds, had played a trick on me. But I knew the truth. That cracked mirror had reflected something real, a tall hooded shadow that shouldn't have been there. I went back to my apartment downtown. I locked the door several times and threw myself on the bed without taking off my shoes. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the dark butcher shop, the bloody sheet falling, and that shadow waiting behind me. I woke up with the morning sun beating down on my face. A feeling of exhaustion washed over me, as if I hadn't slept a minute. My phone vibrated on the nightstand. It was a message from Sarah Monroe, the police detective who occasionally read my articles. "We need to talk. Another body has been found. Same pattern, same location. You're getting into something dangerous." My stomach knotted. Another murder. I knew I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed my camera and a notepad and headed out to the crime scene. The butcher shop was only 5 blocks from the first one I'd visited. Police cruisers flashed and yellow tape blocked the entrance. Sarah stood by the door, her face pale and her eyes tired. "You shouldn't be here, Chris," she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. "This isn't a story for the college paper. It's real." "I know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to understand this." Sarah sighed and let me pass. I walked into the butcher shop with a chill down my spine. The familiar smell of blood and rust hit me like a punch to the gut. This time it wasn't a mannequin. It was a real body. A woman, maybe in her 30s, hanging from a meat hook, just like Reynolds's victims in the 1920s. Her hands were cold, her eyes wide with frozen terror. Suddenly I felt a presence. A wave of cold washed over the room. I turned slowly, and there he was. A tall figure dressed in an old butcher's apron stained with dried blood. His face was covered in deep shadow, but his eyes glowed with a sickly light. In his hands was a large knife, the blade sharp and gleaming. "You shouldn't be here." The guttural voice seemed to come from every direction at once. My throat went dry. My feet were glued to the floor, paralyzed by terror. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure moved slowly toward me, the knife glinting in the dim light. "He never left," I whispered, remembering the words scratched into the wall. Suddenly the figure disappeared, like smoke blown away by the wind. The room went silent again, but the fear remained. The victim's body was still there, but there was no sign of the killer. Sarah rushed in, gun drawn. "Chris, are you okay? What happened?" "He was here," my voice came out as a whisper. "Reynolds, or something that looks like him. He never left." Sarah looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and fear. She wanted to doubt it, but her eyes said she believed it, at least partly. "We need to get out of here," she said, tugging at my arm. Outside, the cool air made me shiver. The sky was gray, as if reflecting the heaviness of that morning. "What are you going to do now?" Sarah asked. "Right," I said. "People need to know that this isn't over, that it might never be over." She nodded. "Be careful, Chris. Some stories are too dangerous to tell." As I walked home, I felt the weight of that truth. John the Cleaver Reynolds was still out there, in one form or another. Maybe a vengeful spirit, maybe something worse. And I knew he wasn't done. The streets of Chicago had never felt so dark. My name is Michael Hayes. I'm 38 years old and have been a detective in Philadelphia for over a decade. I've seen the worst of humanity: homicides, disappearances, unexplained crimes. I've always believed that the real evil lies in the living, not the dead. Ghosts, demons, bullshit. Until I stepped foot in Ravenwood Asylum. It was late at night when I arrived at the old mental hospital. Ravenwood had been closed in the 1950s after a series of unexplained disappearances. Now, children were vanishing from the surrounding area. 4 disappearances in less than 2 months. The clues had led me to this place. The building's facade was a monstrosity of dark brick and broken windows. The full moon cast crooked shadows on the walls, making the outlines look like deformed faces. I took a deep breath, adjusted the flashlight in my hand, and pushed open the rotting wooden double doors. They gave way with a creak that echoed like a muffled scream. The smell of mold and rust filled my nostrils. Peeling walls, overturned furniture, yellowed scraps of paper scattered across the floor. Ravenwood was a monument to abandonment and despair. The dim light of the flashlight flickered, casting shadows that danced across the walls. "Just another old building, Michael," I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the discomfort. I took a few steps, my shoes sinking into the accumulated dust. My eyes scanned the room, searching for something. Anything. A clue. A trail. But all I found were empty hallways and the echoes of my own footsteps. And then I heard it. A childish laugh, soft and distant, that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the hallway. My heart skipped a beat. I gripped the flashlight tighter and followed the sound. My boots squeaked on the rotten floorboards, each step accompanied by the cold that grew around me. I turned the corner and stopped in front of a door marked Treatment Room 3. The ink was faded, but the letters still seemed to whisper ancient secrets. I put my hand on the doorknob and felt the cold metal against my skin. The door opened with a long, painful creak. The room was plunged into darkness. I shone the light inside and saw a rusty gurney in the center, leather straps hanging from it, ready to hold some forgotten patient. Dust-covered medical instruments were scattered on metal trays. A noise behind me, a barely audible whisper. I turned quickly, the flashlight trembling in my hand. Nothing, just the empty, dark hallway. I swallowed hard and looked back into the room. A sheet of paper lay on the gurney, yellowed with age. I walked over and picked it up carefully. It was a medical report from 1952. The words were blurred, but I could make out one sentence. Treatment failed. He has disappeared. The room must be sealed. What the hell? I muttered, feeling cold sweat trickle down the back of my neck. Before I could finish my thought, I heard the laughter again. This time it was closer, almost right next to me. I turned the flashlight toward the sound and saw a shadow run down the hallway. "Hey, who's there?" I shouted, running after it. My footsteps echoed loudly and the hallway seemed to stretch out in front of me. I turned another corner and found a half-open door. Without thinking, I pushed it open and went in. It was a playroom, or what was left of it. Broken porcelain dolls, mutilated teddy bears, and children's drawings scattered across the floor. One drawing caught my eye, a tall, dark figure with long arms and empty eyes. My breath caught in my throat. Behind me, the door slammed shut. The flashlight's light flickered and went out for a second. In the brief moment of darkness, I felt an icy presence. When the light came back on, I saw a silhouette in the corner of the room, tall, hooded, with eyes that glowed like two unlit embers. My muscles froze. The figure didn't move, but the room seemed to shrink around it. A whisper filled the air. "You shouldn't be here." A cold wind blew, extinguishing the light from the lantern. Darkness filled the room. Fear gripped my chest like an invisible hand. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then the light came back on. The figure was gone. Panting, I ran out of the room, my heart pounding. When I finally reached the front door of the asylum, I pushed it open and felt the cold night air envelop me. I stepped out onto the deserted street, trying to process what had just happened. Ravenwood had secrets, secrets that didn't want to be discovered, and now I knew I was dealing with something much worse than I had expected. The doors of Ravenwood Asylum closed behind me with a sharp thud, but the oppressive chill still clung to my skin. The night air didn't bring me the relief I'd hoped for. Every shadow on the street seemed to have eyes. Every sigh of the wind seemed to contain a whisper. I climbed into my car and slammed the door, trying to control the shaking in my hands. The steering wheel was ice cold and my joints ached from clenching so hard. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket. No signal. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. I needed to leave this place behind. But something wouldn't let me. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to run, but my instincts told me it wasn't over. Something inside needed to be discovered. It needed to be freed or stopped. I tried to convince myself that I was tired, that I needed to rest and come back in the morning. But I knew I had no choice. If I left now, I probably wouldn't have the courage to come back. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. And then I opened the door and headed back to the asylum. The beams of the flashlight cut through the heavy darkness of the main hall. Corridors stretched like open wounds full of the promise of madness. The walls seemed to breathe. The floor creaked beneath my feet as if protesting my presence. "You can do it, Michael," I whispered to myself. "Just a little longer." I walked down the hallway toward the children's ward. This was the place that disturbed me the most. Voices of missing children had been reported by residents. This was where I would find answers, or doom. The door to the ward was slightly open, swinging in the wind that didn't exist. I pushed it open, and the creak echoed through the hallways like a lament. Inside, the walls were covered in drawings, figures with empty eyes, dead-end doors, and hands trying to escape from invisible bars. Then I heard the childish laughter again, soft but close. My heart pounded as I walked to the back of the room. A rusty gurney sat in the center, surrounded by broken toys. On the floor, I saw something that shouldn't have been there. A new doll, too clean to have been there for decades. Its glass eyes seemed to follow me. I bent down to pick it up, but before I could touch it, I felt a blast of cold air on the back of my neck. "Please help me." The voice was weak, full of pain. I turned so quickly I almost fell. My flashlight illuminated the void, but for a second, I saw a figure, a small girl, dark hair covering her face, wearing a hospital gown. She looked at me through her hair and then disappeared like smoke. My throat was dry. Every rational part of my brain screamed that it was impossible, but I could no longer deny what I was seeing. Something was trapped here. Something needed my help. I stood up and headed toward the records room, my last hope of understanding what was happening. The door was locked, but a shoulder-pounding blow gave way. Dusty files were scattered everywhere. I rummaged through the drawers, tossing aside old papers. Finally, I found a folder marked with one word: Project Silence. The pages were yellowed and brittle. I read the contents with shaking hands. Experiments on children considered troubled. Attempts to silence their minds through lobotomies and extreme isolation. Some children did not survive. Others disappeared. Those responsible were never found. A shiver ran down my spine. They were here. They were still here. "You shouldn't be here," a cold, hoarse voice whispered. I looked up. A hooded figure stood in the doorway of the room. Tall, arms too long, eyes glowing like ice wells. The flashlight's light flickered and failed. Darkness took over. My body wouldn't obey. The figure slowly approached, the air growing colder by the minute. When I finally managed to move, I ran for the door, my heart pounding. I tripped over scattered files, but managed to escape into the hallway. Behind me, I heard heavy, uneven footsteps. He was following me. My lungs burned as I ran through the hallways. Each door seemed to slam shut on its own, blocking my exit. I saw the entrance to the asylum ahead and gave one last push, throwing myself out. The door slammed shut behind me with a deafening crash. I rolled on the cold floor outside, panting, my eyes fixed on the building. The windows were dark. The silence of the night returned. I stood up, feeling the weight of horror on my shoulders. The asylum fell silent, as if nothing had happened, but I knew the truth. The secrets of Ravenwood Asylum were alive. The voices of the past still echoed through those halls, and the shadowy figure I had encountered would not stop. Something had been awakened, and I knew it would not rest. Neither would I.